episode 151 of Board Game Blitz, a proud member of the Dice Tower Network and a podcast about all things board games that you can listen to in less time than it takes to explain to your small child why their game was left out on the game table last night even though they didn't play it. Board Game Blitz is sponsored by Gray Fox Games. This week, we're talking about kids games. First, we discuss a couple games we played recently, Fire in the Hole and Stelladixit Universe. Then, we talk about kids games that are great to play with just adults. And now, here are your hosts,
Ambie
and Crystal. One quick announcement before we hop into the main episode. If you are listening to this the week it releases, here in just a couple of days is the monthly Tabletop Live Network Marathon, and we are part of this month's marathon stream. You all have heard us talk about TLN a whole bunch, but just in case you forgot, it is the Tabletop Live Network. It is a collection of streamers on Twitch who are dedicated to inclusion and diversity and promoting board game content on the Twitch platform. We do a 24-hour marathon at the end of every month, and this month, Ambie and I are very excited because we are doing a very special stream at 8 p.m. Pacific, 11 p.m. Eastern on Saturday, the 26th. And that is Chris Michaud, formerly of Flip the Table, is going to be hosting a live game show for us that he has created. He created the whole thing from scratch, like everything was built by him, and it's called Mall Night Long. It's a, we're going to go on an adventure through a shopping mall and play a bunch of different games, and I'm super excited about it. Ambie, are you excited too?
Yeah, and we've had practice going through malls together with Mall Madness.
We've played Mall Madness together multiple times now, so. So yeah, we're stoked about that. Please come and join us for that. It's going to be a whole lot of fun, and Chris is very excited about it as well, so join us for that.
Recently, I got a preview copy of a game called Fire in the Hole. It is a game that will be on Kickstarter in March, so it's not on Kickstarter yet. But Fire in the Hole is a party game. It's for 2 to 4 players. It's published by McMiller, which is a small queer-owned company, and they're making like party games and other fun games. And what really stood out to me first is that this game is completely biodegradable, it says, like 100%. There's no plastic in any of the packaging, so it got shipped. There was no like shrink wrap or anything. It's just made out of cardboard and like paper.
That's cool.
And like the laminate, it's not laminate finish, it's like the water-based finish too, kind of like children's books, which I know some about because I've been looking into that. But yeah, that's one cool thing. And then like the game itself is a pop-up board. So this is a party game, like a dexterity party game. There's a pirate ship, it's pirate themed, and you're throwing these little felt balls. They're cannonballs. You're throwing them into this pirate ship that has like a grid of square-shaped holes. And so you're trying to connect 4 of your cannonballs up. It doesn't have to be in a straight line. It can just be like 4 in any orthogonally connected grid. And so you're throwing your balls into the ship. And so the board is a pop-up board, and then you put a mast in the ship, and it looks really cool. So on your turn, it's really simple. You have a deck of cards, and you have a hand of cards, and you play one of your cards. The cards say things like, oh, you fire with both eyes closed, or you fire with both hands, or you fire with an eye patch on or something. So it's like different ways of shooting the cannonball. And then you have a die that you roll, and it's either solo fire or all fire. So you're the only one that throws it, or everyone throws it at the same time. They're balls. Yeah, and then there's also cards that can do other things. Like there's a card that lets you take a card from another player, or a card that lets you draw 3 cards and then play one of those. So different effects. So we had fun playing it. It's really fun, like throwing in and trying to get 4 in a row. And we had a lot of fun playing when it was all fire more. So we didn't like the card play and hand management part as much as just throwing the balls into the ship. So like we played it, and then we played it again and decided to try not using the card hand management and like just always doing all play too instead of solo fire. Because like when we rolled the die, it's 2 for solo fire and 4 for all fire. So like you should get more all fires, but we were getting so many solo fires.
Oh gosh.
And I don't know. And so it's like we're always just like, come on, all fire. And it's like, oh no. So it's just like sad when it wasn't your turn. But I mean, it's a fun party game still, and you can play however you want probably. But yeah, so we tried again with just like drawing a card and playing it instead of like having the hand of cards, because for us also, if we were trying to play strategically with the hand of cards, like that kind of made it take longer, and we wanted to get to the throwing of the cannonball part because that was like the more fun part for us. So we had more fun playing without the hand management and the die. But it was really fun. And it's like pretty hard to get your balls in 4 in a row. Like it seems like it'd be easy to get 4 in a row, theoretically, because you just, have to put them in order. But like you're throwing it in and then they bounce out. And then if other people's balls go in the space next to yours, even though they weren't aiming for that. So like it's all blocked and stuff. So Fire in the Hole, it's a light, fun dexterity game. And it has a really cool table presence with the pop-up board. I posted a picture of it on Twitter so you can see what it looks like. It's pretty cool. And so it'll be on Kickstarter next month, I guess. It's coming out in March. I'll have a link to the Kickstarter pre-Kickstarter sign-up page. I'm not sure what it's called, but there's like
the preview page.
Preview page, yeah. They're on their website. So you can check it out. So that's Fire in the Hole.
Awesome. That does sound like one that, like, if I saw people playing it at a convention, I would immediately wander over and be like, what is that?
Yeah, pretty much.
And I love the fact that it's all eco-friendly. That's really cool. I know more board game publishers are kind of starting to move that direction, and it's really neat to see that happening.
Mm-hmm.
The game that I'm talking about today is one that I've already played a number of times, even though it is relatively new, and that is Stelladixit Universe. So this is a new game from the creators of Dixit, designed by Gérald Catillot and Jean-Louis Robira. I butchered those names, I'm sure, but I wanted to give them credit. Stelladixit Universe does bear some similarities to Dixit, which Dixit originally came out in 2008, which is 14 years ago now, and that kind of blows my mind a little bit. But this game just came out in 2021. In Stelladixit Universe, you are all, the theme, okay, in Dixit games, the theme doesn't really shine through. This is not a criticism, it's just a fact. But you're trying to get the most points, and the way you do that is there is a grid of 15 cards laid out on the table, and if you've seen Dixit cards before, you already know what they look like. They're kind of abstract, weird, cool, like, ethereal looking, like weird artwork, things that you wouldn't expect to be kind of put together and just odd stuff in general. And it's beautiful, all very pretty. And of that grid of 15 cards, each round, then a word card is going to get drawn, and that will say a random word on it. So it might say moon, for instance. Then each player secretly marks down which of the 15 cards they would associate with the chosen word. So in this instance, moon. So you would look at the grid of 15 and you'd be like, okay, that card, and this one. I think those are all associated with moon somehow. And there's no rules as to how you associate words with cards. It's just whatever your brain thinks. Once all players have selected, then you go around in turn order, and each player reveals one of the cards that they selected. If more than one other player also selected that card, so 3 or more players total, including the person who revealed it, then all of the players who selected it get 2 points each. If only one other player selected that card, then the 2 players who selected it get 3 points each. So that's the best way to score points. But if no other players selected the card that you revealed, you are out of the round entirely, which can be kind of brutal. But it's interesting because of that whole, like, you get an extra point for only matching with one person. You have those moments where you're like, do I pick the card that obviously everybody would have picked because there's a moon on it, for instance, or whatever? Or do I pick this other one that's a little bit less obvious, but I think somebody might have chosen it just to see if I can get that extra point? And then you go around in turn order until basically everyone's cards have been revealed. And if you are eliminated from the round, your other cards are still in play for the other players. So when they reveal a card, if one of your other choices does match, they will get points based on that match, but you don't if you've already been eliminated from the round. And if you were the player who chose the most cards at the beginning of the round, once you get eliminated, you get negative points for the cards that you have left over. So it also incentivizes you to not go wild and choose a whole bunch of cards, because if you choose the most... I was wondering
how many cards you choose.
You can technically choose up to 10 of the 15.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, 10 is allowed. In most games I've played, which I've played a physical version once, and I've played it digitally on Board Game Arena now. now a few times. In most of the games that I've played, the number of cards chosen tends to go anywhere between, like on average, like 3 and 6. Like that's the kind of where I tend to see most things lay when I've played this game. But, you know, there's always exceptions. So you go through that 4 times. There are 4 total rounds, and each round you clear out 1 row of 5 cards from the grid of 15. And so each round you have some new options available. And at the end of the game, whoever has the most points wins. It's really simple to learn, just like Dixit is. The artwork, of course, is gorgeous, just like Dixit. Mm-hmm. And, you know, you have those similarities where you kind of only want to match with one person and not everybody. It does not feel like Dixit when you're playing it, though, even though it bears those kind of mechanical similarities. So I can't say if you like Dixit, you'll like this, because I don't necessarily think that's the case. But I really enjoyed this game anyway. I like the artwork. I like that it's simple. I like that it's quick to play. And I've been enjoying playing it on Board Game Arena as well as physical copy. So that is Stelladixit Universe, published by Libelud. Ambie, the game that you talked about today, in my head at least, kind of sounds a little bit like a kid's game or a family weight game, like one that you could get, you know, younger children playing. And our topic today is kids games, but not just kids games that are fun to play with adults. Not like, obviously you could play them with kids too, but we want to talk about games that are in theory intended for children, that you can enjoy even if children are not present.
Yeah, and we actually know a lot of those, don't we?
Yeah, I think that there's, you know, when we were kids, board games themselves were thought of in the public sphere more as a kid's activity than an anyone activity. Obviously, you know, in the 80s and 90s, there were board games being released and marketed to adults, but there were much less. And they weren't marketed as heavily, and, you know, it was way more of a niche hobby for teens and adults to be playing board games than it is now. So I think a lot of board games that were made for kids didn't have as much appeal for adults. You know, I've had discussions with friends who have had to play board games with their kids, and they play, you know, the old classic board games, and they tend to be like, oh my gosh, they want to play Candyland for the 80th time. And it's like, for the record, I've said this on the podcast before, Candyland does have value for color matching learning for young children. I digress. But like, I kind of want to tell those people, like, there are games that your kids can learn and enjoy and play that you can also have fun with. And that's important.
Although I think there is like an age limit. Like right now, my kids, the games for them are not games that I would just play with adults.
Okay, yeah.
Too. But like, once you get to a certain age, the kids games get more fun for adults, I think. Because yeah, right now, I think a lot of the kids games that are fun for adults, like the one that I talked about, Fire in the Hole, it says ages 6+. It's a dexterity game, and I think a lot of the kids games that are fun for adults are dexterity games, and toddlers don't have very good dexterity, so there aren't many, like, the dexterity games for them are super easy for adults, like Rhino Hero Jr. is just like, oh, you stack this in order, and these huge things that you stack, 6 things, and like, oh, yay. But like actual Rhino Hero, not Rhino Hero Jr., there's a lot more stuff to stack, and it's not like thick cardboard, it's actually like cards that you're stacking, so that's more challenging for adults.
Right, and then if you move on to Rhino Hero Super Battle, you're creating this gigantic, sprawling behemoth of a card tower, basically, that can get really wildly out of control at times. And I do think that a lot of especially the dexterity games that are marketed to kids, I think the reason that they can appeal to adults is because, like, even though your ability to be dexterous changes throughout your life, like we all have that, you know, that moment where your hand is shaking and you're just like trying to whatever. And it also, if you are going to play these games with children, it helps level the playing field to some degree, because a lot of dexterity games marketed toward kids, the spaces that you have to maneuver in might be kind of small. Rhino Hero is a good example of that. Like when you have to place the rhino onto the flat card, that might be easier for a child than an adult because of the size specificity. And so it kind of helps, like, obviously an adult might be more dexterous, but they also have larger hands that could theoretically knock the whole thing over.
Yeah. And I think adults tend to have shakier hands than kids. Like, well, kids have the problem with just being dexterous in general, but like once they've got that down, I don't think their hands are as shaky. I don't know.
So I think, so I have some examples of things, but what's the difference between a kid's game and a family weight game? Because, at least for me, I think I kind of tend to use those terms interchangeably sometimes. Like, I will refer to things that are probably a family game as a kid's game, or a kid's game as a family game. Is there a difference? Like, is there a distinct difference between those two categories of games?
I'm not really sure. I think in my mind they feel different, but I also now think of kids' games as games for my kids, which are like
Right,
lot
the
younger.
little ones.
And so I think sometimes I think of kids' games as games that kids can play that by themselves, like with
That
other
makes
kids,
sense.
and then family games are games that kids would play with their parents. So family games are usually slightly more like longer and more involved, I think. That's just in my mind. But
No, that makes sense. I would say, no, I think you hit the nail on the head. I would imagine a family weight game is a game that a kid could most likely play on their own, but they probably couldn't learn or teach it as easily. Like, the rules are a little more complex, or there's a little more going on. And maybe once the kid already knows it, then that family game can be just a kid's game. But just opening the shrink wrap and getting into it might require the help of an adult, for instance. Whereas, like, some kids' games, depending on the age of the child, I imagine you could just hand them off to a kid and they can just figure it out on their own.
yeah, if they can read,
Right.
I guess.
So are there any games in your collection that would be categorized as, like more a kid's game that you like to pull out with a group of just adults?
Yes. Actually, like, so I have an even bigger shelf of kids games now. I have like 3 or 4 shelves or blocks in my calyx of kids games. But before I had kids, years before I had kids, I had a shelf of kids games. And some of them were for playing with my nephew or something, but a lot of them I've only played with adults and hadn't played with kids yet. So one of them is Clack Lumberjack, which is a dexterity game where you're knocking down bark off of a tree. So it's like there's these plastic tree barks that are circles with or tree trunks that are like circle cylinder pieces that you stack on top of each other, and then they have barks on the edge. So like they connect together, but then if you hit it with an axe lightly, then the bark will fall off, and you want to make the bark fall off but not the core fall off. So it's like this big stack, kind of Jenga-like, I guess. It's a dexterity game, but you're trying to knock off the bark and not the cores, because you get negative points for the cores. And I just have a lot of fun. I've just played that with adults and had fun. Because like adults, if you're trying to be like competitive about it, you're just tapping it and then trying to get it so that other people will knock off the bark. Just like with Jenga, actually. Like, I played competitive Jenga with adults, and the tower gets very unstable. It's like very difficult.
And I think for me, the reason games like Jenga have appealed over the years playing them with adults is, I mean, also, well, if adults are consuming adult substances, those types of games can be fun for obvious reasons. But even that aside, I think they create moments of tension that you don't typically see in lighter games, in lighter strategic games. Like, you might have more memorable moments with a dexterity game, even if it's a kid's game, just because, like, yeah, when that tower gets really high and somebody somehow successfully pulls that block out and it doesn't fall, like,
and everyone's waiting for it to fall too.
Yes, like, that's, those stand up around the table, nobody touched the table, like, it's a very intense moment at times. But then there's other dexterity games that are marketed toward kids that you can actually play super strategically too. I think Ice Cool is a really good example of that. Like, technically, you're just flicking penguins around a cardboard school trying to collect fish. And that sounds like, okay, light, whatever. But you can get really good at flicking those weighted penguins around. And I've seen people make ridiculous shots in that game. And so it's neat because you can play it just like flick, 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 whatever. Or you can get into it, kind of like we do with Strike, and you can turn it into something more serious.
Yeah, I mean, I guess Strike is another one. But yeah, Ice Cool is also one that I've only played with adults.
Yeah, I've never played it with kids either.
Yeah, like, is it really a children's game?
Well, and the makers of Ice Cool have a game on Kickstarter right now. I don't know how long the
yeah.
campaign lasts, but they have Iron Forest, which is the
Mhm.
game that was inspired by Ice Cool, but it's a multi-level thing with like catapults where you vault your
gosh.
little weighted dudes up to the second level.
I wanna play that.
I'm super curious about that one. I think it's probably going to be really neat. I had a few other dexterity games on my list of things that I either own or love to play, and I would say they are kids games, but I've never played them with kids. Things like Loop and Louie or Loop and Chewy, Suspend from Melissa and Doug, which like that's a kid's
Melissa
toy
and Doug is a
company.
kids brand. Yeah,
Yeah, that's
I
a
didn't
kid's
know
brand.
they made that.
Yeah. Yeah, Suspend came from them. Animal Upon Animal. Honestly, we could put a whole bunch of Haba games on this list. Haba does a really good job, especially in the games they market for like around that 6-year-old age range, like you said, not the ones for like 2-year-olds, but they do a good job of creating games that have interest for adults and kids alike. So yeah, another one like Dancing Eggs is another Haba game that one's really hilarious to play with adults.
This is funny, yeah.
Because it's much harder for adults than it is for kids to keep those eggs in certain areas. Like you have to like put an egg under your chin or between your knees and then like run around the table, and it's so funny to watch adults do that. And another one I put down was Bermuda Pirates, which is the game where you're pushing a little ship along a board, but there are magnets in the board and you don't know where they are. And if your ship hits one of them, it tilts forward super quickly and dumps its cargo into the ocean. That one is super fun. I really like Bermuda Pirates.
That sounds cool. But yeah, is there another category? So we've talked about a bunch of dexterity games, but though that's not the only type of children's games there are.
Correct. There are a bunch of other children's games. I think some memory games are fun. I found a lot of adults tend to not enjoy memory games. That's partially because I think as we get older, our memories tend to get worse.
Yes, it's true.
Which can also make, again, memory games fun to play with adults and children combined, because sometimes kids are really good at memory games and you're like, oh, this will be easy. Nope, the kids have got it all over you. Some kids games are real-time games, which is a category of games that I know you like, Ambie.
Yes, I like speed and real-time games.
Yeah, so we played a game together at BlitzCon a few years ago called Monster Match, where you roll a die and then you have to claim a monster from the table that matches the condition on the die. So it might say 3 eyes, for instance, or 2 hands, and then you look at all of the cards that are out on the table and you don't know how many monsters are going to meet those conditions. It's different every round, and that makes it interesting because it's not like in some, like speed games where you have to pick a thing, it's like there's only one of it out there, and once somebody gets it, it's gone. But in this game, theoretically, everybody could score points in the same round, depending on how many monsters are out on the table. So that makes it neat and a little less mean, I would say, than some other games like that.
Yeah, and then Ghost Blitz is a speed game that we've talked about on the podcast before because it has Blitz in the title.
Yeah.
But yeah, my kids actually they like that game. They don't know like all the rules yet, but I've started getting them to match like the cards when they match the pieces. Aww. So they can grab the piece.
That's super cute.
But they don't understand the whole concept of exact matches yet. So they see like the blue chair and they're like, "Oh, chair."
Right.
Even though the chair's
that makes
red.
sense.
But yeah. So I think even like young kids can do speed games kind of like grabbing matches because they're really good at finding matches and like just finding details of things. Like they see details that I don't see a lot of the times. So yeah, they're really good at finding matches and stuff. And so like simple speed games, I think even toddlers can do.
Yeah. And I think that can be why those games are also fun to play with just adults, because sometimes adults are really bad at it, and you've got a whole table full of people staring at a sea of cards and nobody's doing anything.
Yeah, because we're just like skimming over the part that we
like, where is the gosh darn thing that I'm supposed to find? And you can't find it anywhere.
Then a kid walks by and is like, oh, there.
Right? Yes, like that is definitely what happened. We've talked about some other games on the podcast before that would definitely fall into the category of games we'd like to play that with adults that could be for kids. Igloo Pop, I think, is a good example of that as well.
Yeah,
you and I both
one I have.
love that one. Yeah. Like, it's shaking igloos and trying to figure out how many little beads are inside of them just by the sound is like a really silly concept. But every time I've taught that game to people, they really enjoy it.
Yeah.
Any other games in your collection that are faves of yours?
I'm trying to think. I guess this is more in the family weight game that I think of, but games like Stuffed Fables and I guess the new Familiar Tales, those are like geared towards children, but they're like children's story campaign games, and adults can play them and enjoy them. Like adults who like the story of and playing with cute cute kid story things. Like people who like Disney movies.
Well, I actually got a shipping notification for Familiar Tales not too long ago, so it should be arriving soon. Maybe I'll take it to Dice Tower West with me and see if somebody wants to like play through the first scenario or something. I'm excited about Familiar Tales. I have not played Stuffed Fables, but I have a lot of the other storybook games, or I've played a lot of the other storybook games, so I'm excited about that one. But yeah, that's definitely more family weight for sure, like you said, because a kid couldn't like learn that one on their own unless they were much older. Well, we would love to hear from our listeners what kids games you own and you bring out, even when the kids are asleep or not around, that you enjoy to play with your friends or family members who are not children. Tell us which ones we're missing that we haven't named that we should pick up and add to our collections. And yeah, I'm excited to hear what you all have to say.
And that's it for this week's Board Game Blitz. Visit our website, boardgameblitz.com, for video and blog content, as well as to get links to all our social media pages. This episode was sponsored by Grey Fox Games. The Game Found campaign for Last Light is getting closer to launching, so make sure you visit lastlightgame.com now to learn more. And don't forget you can get 20% off non-exclusive items at greyfoxgames.com when you use the code GFGBLITZ2022 at checkout. Grey Fox Games. Quality games, cleverly crafted. Join the Blitzkrieg community on Discord by following the link in the show notes. You can support the show by leaving us a rating and review on your podcast provider. And if you want behind-the-scenes access and an invite to our private Slack channel, visit patreon.com/boardgameblitz. Our theme song was composed by Andrew Morrow. Technical support provided by Toby Mack. Board Game Blitz is part of the Dice Tower Network. Until next time, play that children's board game, my friends. Play that children's board game now. Bye, everyone.
Bye.